With only $40 left and bills piling up, Sarah's life was crumbling. Walking home from another failed job interview, she spots an elderly man shivering in the cold. Despite her own desperate situation, she hands him her last $20. Next morning, a knock on her door changes everything. What happens next will change the way you think about kindness. The winter wind cut through Sarah's thin jacket as she trudged home from her fifth failed job interview that week. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of mounting bills and dwindling hope. The city streets seemed colder than usual that evening, matching the chill that had settled in her heart. Just 2 months ago, she'd had it all figured out. A steady job at the marketing firm, a modest but comfortable apartment, and enough savings to feel secure. Then came the company downsizing. Now, at 28, she was watching her carefully built life crumble piece by piece. Opening her wallet, Sarah counted her remaining money for what felt like the 100th time that day. $40. That's all that stood between her and complete financial disaster. Her rent was already 2 weeks late, and the final notice from the electric company sat unopened on her kitchen counter. She knew what it said: pay by Friday or face disconnection. The streetlights were beginning to flicker on as the early winter darkness descended. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter, quickening her pace. She just wanted to get home, crawl under her blankets, and forget about this awful day. Maybe tomorrow would bring better news. Maybe tomorrow someone would finally give her a chance. That's when she saw him. An elderly man huddled on a bench, shivering in the cold. He wore no coat, just a thin sweater that offered little protection against the bitter wind. His hands trembled as he stared ahead, seeming lost and confused. Sarah hesitated. She knew she should keep walking. Every rational thought screamed at her to protect what little she had left, but something made her stop. Perhaps it was the way he reminded her of her own grandfather who had passed away 3 years ago. Or maybe it was the complete despair in his eyes, a feeling she knew all too well lately. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah approached to him. Up close, she could see the man's face was lined with worry and exhaustion. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed both present and somehow far away. $20. Half of everything she had left in the world. Sarah pressed the bill into his trembling hands, along with directions to a nearby diner where she knew the owner sometimes let people warm up with free coffee. The old man's fingers closed around the money, but he said nothing, just nodded, his eyes filling with tears. That night, Sarah lay awake in her cold apartment, wondering if she'd done the right thing. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Kindness matters most when it's hardest to give. But as she stared at her ceiling, watching shadows from passing cars dance across it, she couldn't help but wonder if sometimes kindness wasn't enough. If sometimes life just kept pushing you down no matter how hard you tried to do the right thing. Morning came too soon, bringing with it another day of job hunting and worry. Sarah was just finishing her last cup of coffee, one of the few luxuries she still allowed herself, when a knock at her door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Most of her friends had gradually drifted away as her financial situation worsened, tired of her constant need to decline invitations or borrow money. The landlord wasn't due for collection until next week. For a moment, she considered pretending she wasn't home. Another knock, more insistent this time. Sarah set down her coffee cup and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, she saw a well-dressed man in his 40s, his expression serious but kind. He didn't look like a bill collector, but these days, Sarah had learned to be wary. Opening the door just enough to speak through the crack, she asked who he was. The man introduced himself as David Thompson and explained he needed to speak with her about something important. There was an urgency in his voice that made Sarah pause. Should she trust this stranger? David began to tell a story that seemed almost too extraordinary to be true. The elderly man Sarah had helped the previous evening wasn't just another homeless person. He was Richard Thompson, David's father, a retired teacher who had spent his life devoted to helping others. Richard had been recently diagnosed with early-stage dementia. The previous day, during what should have been a routine walk to the corner store, he had become disoriented. In his confusion, he had wandered for hours, leaving behind both his phone and wallet. As the sun set and temperatures dropped, he found himself in an unfamiliar part of the city, too proud or too confused to ask for help. The family had been searching frantically, fear growing with each passing hour. They'd called hospitals, police stations, and searched the streets themselves. Thanks to Sarah's $20 and directions, Richard had made it to the local diner. There, the warmth and familiar environment had helped clear his mind enough to remember his son's phone number. Within an hour, he was safely back home with his family. But the story didn't end there. David explained that he'd been determined to find and thank the person who had helped his father. The family had gone through security footage from nearby businesses, trying to piece together Richard's journey. That's how they'd seen it, the moment that had brought David to Sarah's door. Sarah listened, barely breathing, as David continued. His father, it turned out, wasn't just any retired teacher. Throughout his career, Richard Thompson had run a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged students access education and resources they couldn't otherwise afford. Even in retirement, he remained on the foundation's board, though his recent diagnosis was making it increasingly difficult to manage the foundation's daily operations. The foundation needed someone new, someone who understood firsthand the importance of helping others, especially when times were tough. Someone who could see beyond their own struggles to recognize the needs of others. Someone exactly like Sarah. David paused, watching as Sarah tried to process everything he was saying. Then came the words that would change her life forever. "Would you be interested in interviewing for the position?" Sarah sat there, stunned, tears welling in her eyes. Was this really happening? Had her last $20 somehow led her exactly where she needed to be? The interview process moved quickly. Sarah's background in marketing proved valuable. The foundation needed someone who could not only manage its daily operations, but also help spread its message and reach more students in need. Her personal experience with financial hardship gave her unique insight into the challenges faced by the families they helped. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in her new office, still amazed by how much her life had changed. The foundation offered not just a salary that would solve her immediate financial problems, but a chance to make a real difference in people's lives. A chance to help others the way she'd once been helped. In that moment, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice, gentle and wise. Kindness matters most when it's hardest to give. Through one small act of compassion, given when she had almost nothing left to give, Sarah had found not just a job, but a purpose. Sometimes the universe has a way of bringing things full circle. A single act of kindness, given when we have the least to spare, can open doors we never knew existed. And you? What would you do if you had only $40 left? Would you have the courage to share it with a stranger in need?